Taiwan and countries in Central and Eastern Europe have much to share with each other, from democratic experiences to economic opportunities. But between them lie China and Russia. And I don't mean that in the geographical sense. China is a massively important trade partner and market for European economies, which have to tread carefully around issues Beijing considers sensitive or suffer the consequences. Despite that, CEE and Baltic states don't seem all that closed off to Taiwan. On the contrary, out of the top 10 countries with the highest number of official visits going either way, 5 were from the Central and Eastern Europe and the Baltic regions. However, public opinion on Taiwan remains confused. In some of the biggest countries of the region, Poland, Czechia, Slovakia, and Hungary, known as the Visegrad Group, there is little acceptance for Chinese policies towards Taiwan. But on whether Taiwan is an inseparable part of the People's Republic of China, opinions seem to span the spectrum, with between half and 2/3 of respondents agreeing or remaining ambivalent in all 4 countries. So, to understand this complex and sometimes contradictory bundle of relationships, we welcome to the studio Mitch Yang, the former managing partner of the Central and Eastern Europe Investment Fund at Taiwania Capital and a former NASA engineer, and Marcin Jerzewski, the head of the Taiwan office of the think tank European Values Center for Security Policy. Both are coming to us from Taipei. Marcin, I want to start with you here. The growth dynamic in Taiwan, EU, and specifically CEE relations seem to be especially high in the Central and Eastern Europe context in that region. Why is that?
You know, in order to understand the dynamics in relations between the EU and CEE in particular and Taiwan, we have to zoom out a little bit and also look at the broader context of the EU's relations with China. As much as we should talk about Taiwan's subjectivity and respect it, for a long time Taiwan has been considered to be merely a sore wound in the broader context of the bloc's relations with East Asia. However, in recent years, we have seen the recognition that Taiwan can be a meaningful, like-minded partner on its own terms for the EU and for those member states in the eastern part of the bloc, and it is connected to a recalibration of various descriptions of China on which the EU has agreed. So the EU describes China in 3 ways. China is a partner for cooperation, an economic competitor, and most importantly, a strategic rival. And in recent years, we have seen the shift and the importance attached to the conceptualization of China as a systemic rival has clearly risen. And Central Eastern European countries see it very clearly. For example, amid the growing confluence of strategic interests between Beijing and Moscow, and it is precisely in the CEE countries where we recognize growing belligerence of Russia as an existential threat to our security and prosperity. So there is very much this interest driven component to expanding relations with Taiwan. Because Taiwan is at the very forefront of Chinese belligerence, it can serve as a very useful knowledge bank for Central Eastern European countries as they try to understand China's grand strategy and its practical ramifications as China pursues its ironclad friendship with Russia. And secondly, given the willingness of Central Eastern European economies to actively partake in the pursuit of opportunities that arise out of the EU's strategic autonomy, Taiwan is an important knowledge bank in the economic domain. But then there is also, on top of this, a very pragmatic interest-based basket of reasons for expansion of ties. There are some reasons which are more normative and less tangible. Taiwan and Central Eastern European democracies began transitioning away from authoritarianism around the same time. So in political science, we would call these countries collectively the Huntingtonian third wave democracies. So the shared experience of, for instance, the first partially open election in Poland to the parliament in 1989, that happened very closely after the lifting of the martial law in Taiwan, in most of the free area of Taiwan in 1987, are some of the parallels that can explain what we mean when we talk about like-mindedness between these democracies. As newly consolidated democracies, Taiwan and CE really refuse to take democracy for granted, and the relatively recent memory of the pains of authoritarian rule is something that brings civil societies on both sides closer together. So indeed, it's not only about doing business, but it's also about those people-to-people connections that play an extremely important role, particularly in light of the absence of formal diplomatic ties.
Well, Mitch, from what you've seen on the ground, what is the impact of the China context on the economic ties between Taiwan and Central and Eastern European countries?
Well, whoever had this big bad wolf neighbor trying to annex you, trying to do whatever they can to damage your relationship with potential friends, it's very, very difficult for Taiwan to do too much. Of course, Taiwanese didn't know much about the CE region until very recently, and we have been trying very, very hard to change that. Through both the political way and economical ways, and through the normal citizens' efforts. However, something beyond that could be done by the governments and people in the CE region. Look at what happened in the U.S. in the past few years. Americans' perception about Taiwan and Taiwan's identity it has been changed drastically in the past few years. I think a big part is actually from government, both the governments and parliament members, senator and Congress. They put in so much effort to emphasize, Taiwan being an independent entity, although they didn't say much about recognizing Taiwan as an independent country. Actually, quite a few did say that. And that helps the media and also the population, the general Americans, to understand that, Taiwan is actually not like what PRC trying to describe as part of China. I think governments in the CE region should be more bold in speaking the truth. The truth is Taiwan. Whatever you want to name it, ROC or ROC, Taiwan is an independent country. It's an independent country. Look at Kosovo. Is Kosovo an independent country? Of course. But in terms of its size, its capability, its degree of independence, Taiwan is much, much higher than Kosovo. And of course, then Palestine. But all these European countries, they prefer to look at these two countries as independent country, but not Taiwan. I personally consider this a little bit, hypocrisy. If you can recognize these two quote unquote area as independent country, why not Taiwan? So, and of course, because of the big bad wolf is China, right? So whoever does that is going to pay the price. But again, it all depends on how you do it. Look at what Czech Republic and Lithuania, I think they've done a good job, and we can do that. We can start it one step at a time. Particularly Poland, I think Poland has the strength and the understanding and the skill and the economic strength in doing more. So actually, I will urge Polish government try to look into that and to work with Taiwanese government and Taiwanese enterprise, see whether there's something that we can do. By doing that, I think it will give Taiwanese government the backing of putting more resources, connecting more with the Polish government and enterprises.
Well, since you mentioned Lithuania famously got into China's crosshairs after getting closer to Taiwan and suffered economically for it. China has rolled out coercive economic measures that sparked a conversation in Europe, in the EU, about presenting more of a united front and opposing these kind of coercive measures aimed at any individual state. Marcin, how is that going a few years on after China penalized Lithuania for being friends with Taiwan?
In Central Europe, we have experienced very clearly China's propensity to deploy the so-called divide and conquer strategy as the main tool of engagement with the continent. And it has taken the form of the infamous N+1, if I may, initiative that was supposed to bring Central Eastern European countries and China closer together. Now we're at 14 countries after the Baltic states have left. And this N+1 concept is important because indeed China watchers in Europe have long called for a 27+1 approach vis-a-vis China that would allow the European Union to truly speak to China with a unified voice. However, it is extremely difficult to achieve because some member states that refuse to allow the bloc to pursue more assertive action vis-a-vis China have really a broad array of their own domestic considerations to do so. For example, Cyprus is one of the countries that is most valiantly defending a more amicable position of the EU towards China because it needs Chinese support in the United Nations Security Council, given that the northern part of the island has been occupied since 1974. For instance, Spain is also viewing the issue of Taiwan through a very similar lens as its own domestic struggle over the status of Catalonia and to some extent Basque country. Then individual member states also have very different types of a geopolitical calculus. Central Eastern European countries, many of which are guardians of the external border of the European Union and NATO, definitely see Russia as an existential threat, but then the growing relations also in the military domain between Russia and China, but also Belarus and China, given that there are PLA boots on the ground in that border nation, are a very strong signal to be more careful about engaging with the country. For those that are farther away from the current geopolitical hotspot, economic considerations and the vision of making a Chinese dream come true may seem more likely and at the end of the day also more electorally viable in the context of their democracies. So all in all, we have yet to see the emergence of a 27+1 model simply because Europe has a hard time reconciling its divergent interests when it comes to engaging with Beijing.
Well, but even in the Visegrad group, the 4 countries that we saw statistics on earlier in this segment, most people seem to be pretty ambivalent on Taiwan, even though there is little acceptance for Chinese policies. Marcin, do you think that minds are changing because of China's support for Russia in its invasion of Ukraine, the involvement in Europe, you said boots on the ground. Is that changing people's minds? Is that kind of like opening people up to seeing China not just as a market to sell goods at?
I think that there are 2 issues at play in your question. The first one is about changing perceptions of Taiwan in Central Europe, and the other one is about changing perceptions of China. And growing skepticism around engagement with China doesn't necessarily automatically translate into greater support for Taiwan. I think that there is ample space for Taiwan, both at the level of government and civil society, to engage more with publics in Central Europe to help them get to know Taiwan. Actually, it's still quite common in a very cliche way to hear Central European publics confuse Taiwan and Thailand, and oftentimes the only opportunity that publics in Central Europe, even those that are curious about the global affairs and listen to the news, that the only chance that they have to hear about Taiwan is during moments of escalation, either live fire exercises pursued by the PLA or natural disasters. And that doesn't really build a very positive, relatable picture. Unfortunately, I believe that the Taiwanese authorities have lagged behind other countries when it comes to developing and implementing successful soft power strategies. For example, South Korea is a great case study in how to win hearts and minds in a way that also translates into economic benefit. Polish people are definitely riding the K-wave, while the government of South Korea is benefiting from lucrative contracts in defense industry and also nuclear energy. and Taiwan just doesn't have this type of appeal. And I think that the part of it is connected to the ongoing soul search in Taiwan and the type of narrative that it should craft about itself. Is it going to continue the narratives about being a free China? Is it only going to focus on its Silicon Shield and economic prowess? Or is it going to allow itself to spread the gospel of its own distinct culture? And as long as Taiwan is confused about it, so will be the Central European publics.
Well, Mitch, we're almost out of time, but I want to give you the last word here. What kind of soft power measures would you like to see implemented in Central and Eastern Europe, maybe even EU in general, to improve Taiwan's soft power reach and to raise the consciousness of Taiwan, which, as Marcin mentioned, brings economic benefits?
I agree with Marcin 100%. We could have done more, and particularly the government side and the private sectors as well. We need to extend our reaches of soft power to the CE region. I think Korea has done a great job. A lot of things that they have done could have been done by Taiwanese and Taiwanese government. So we should do that. I think, particularly in the past few years, because the activity and relationship between Taiwan and the CE country has increased, dramatically. I believe that more and more people and government agency will get involved in this kind of activity to do whatever we can to let people in the region understand more about Taiwan, Taiwanese, and Taiwan's history, and all this soft power activity and reaching out. I believe that I'm working on it, and actually I have a project going on, and we are trying to do it. But that's the direction that every Taiwanese should put efforts into. Of course, we hope that the government can do more.